Hello and welcome back to the Honest Business Podcast. I hope you are very well. Today we are going to talk about something that I think people wonder quite a lot, which is about sustainability and is your business actually sustainable? We talk about sustainable scaling and I talk about growing your business and how can you do that in a sustainable manner. But what we want to think about is your business actually sustainable? And this was a question someone asked me the other day and said, when we were discussing their business, they said, do you actually think my business is sustainable? Will it still work in 15 years' time? Does it have longevity to it? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, first up, we need to figure out what does sustainability actually mean? Now, when I'm talking about sustainable in this sense, we aren't necessarily just talking or exclusively talking about the environment. I'm actually talking about, is it sustaining? Like, can your business sustain your life, your demands of it, the market? Has it got longevity? Yes, the environment comes into that, but that is not the kind of main focus of this episode. We're talking about a generalist term. So, what does sustainable actually mean? That's going to mean something different to everybody. It will depend on what industry you're sat in, what business you are creating. Different businesses will have different parameters around what does sustainable look like. But as a kind of overall arching situation, what I would say is you're looking at is, can something sustain itself through various environmental, non able to control external factors? That's something that is a really interesting thing to look at. It's also something to look at, if your lead pool got cut off tomorrow, could your business still make money? Can you find ways of making money? Would the business still run effectively? Could you grow it without, if you took away your biggest lead driver, would the business still work? There's various different kind of pointers that we can use, similar to those I've just outlined, that would indicate, is your business actually sustainable? But what I want to cover today is this idea that it's not about the size of your business. So I'm not focusing on, do you need to get your business to a certain point in order for that to therefore be sustainable? I want to take into account the business you have today. And I want you to think about, if this business that you have right now, could that sustain you long term? Is that going to work, that business model, in 10, 15 years' time? One of the first questions I would say to that is, what do you want it to do in 10, 15 years' time? 20 years' time, if you want to. You could think about 5 years' time. But what do you want that business to do for you? For some people, that will have been to impact millions of people. For others, it will be to pay, to have enough money so that I can live on £30,000 a year. Like, whatever it is for you, getting clear on, what do you want the business to do in 15 years' time? Is it that you've got investment and therefore in 15 years' time, you need to have made sure that, your shareholders are paid back or they are receiving frequent dividends, etc., etc.? Like, what does sustainable look like for your business? And we're also going to think about, can it hold the test of time? Business needs to evolve and businesses have to change. Product businesses are one of the kind of clearest ones to look at in terms of when we think about diversification. Diversification of product in product-based businesses is huge because they have to constantly switch up and change what they're doing a lot of the time. Service-based businesses, often the diversification is less, but actually to build a more sustainable business, it makes sense for you to actually add more diversification in. So diversification is something that I really urge people to look at. If you are someone who has a really nice sized business now and you're quite happy and it does sustain you and sustains the stakeholders around you, but actually you're thinking, how can I make this more sustainable? You want to be looking at, how can we diversify risk? How do we look at what are the risks to the business and where do we kind of put solutions in place and where do we put backup plans in place, and how can we make sure that revenue ultimately is protected? When we look at sustainability, revenue is a huge important factor because ultimately a lot of things can't happen if there's no cash flow in the business. If there's no revenue in the business can suffer. This isn't about looking at contingency planning, which is a separate thing about, if you've got X amount of money in the bank, then how long is that going to hold you for? That's not what we're looking at. What we're looking at is a business robust enough to take hits, to take different things from different places, often things that you can't control, worse, God forbid, war or something like natural disasters. How can the business adapt and change? COVID is a great example of where businesses have had to actually implement this and find out whether their plans and whether what they've thought about previously has worked. Obviously, no one could really foresee what happened with COVID, and that was a huge, shake up for a lot of businesses. But that will give you a sort of initial understanding around why this is important and actually what the impact of this can truly be. When you are looking at, is your business actually sustainable? What you need to look at is your business design. This really is the core piece of where this all starts from. So, is your business design workable? Does it work for you? That's the first bit we need to look at, is does this work for you? And then beyond that, we need to look at, does it work from an economic perspective? Does it work from an environmental perspective? Does it work from a, sustainability perspective in terms of being able to maintain the business? Is the demand there? Is the share of the market size big enough? But also the business design needs to take into account of can it be adaptable? Does it have longevity built within it? And some of those things is hard to measure, but also a lot of it is things that you can really sort of challenge yourself on and be like, well, actually, if you did a SWOT analysis and you looked at risks and threats, and a lot of those will be external, and you think about, okay, well, if one of those happened, what can the business do? That's when you start thinking about, is the business designed to allow that to happen, or would you need to tweak the business design in order to make that work? One thing to think about, so business design is one thing, and I spend time with people trying to figure out, is their business design actually set up for long-term sustainability, or is it just a here and now? Most people I speak to, it's a here and now, and we take steps and changes to make it more sustainable. It's not that it either is sustainable or it isn't, it's more of a ever-going line, I don't know the right word there, sort of scale, that's it. There's a sort of a ever-moving scale of sort of how sustainable the business is. It's not a yes or no. And so what you next need to look at is long-term viability. So long-term viability needs to look at things like technological advancements, market trends, really figuring out, if technology advances to X, how will the business survive and thrive? So looking at AI is a really great example to that. Many people are sort of start saying, oh, AI is going to take my job and it's going to take this business. And, the clever businesses are saying, well, it's not really. It's going to improve X, Y, and Z thing. And it's going to make sure that we need to have a service that will service X, Y, and Z thing. It's about pairing that together. But technological advancement is a really interesting one where you can look at your business and think, is this actually, can we move with this? Are we agile enough for this, or would we not? Another one is regulatory changes. So a lot of businesses, when Brexit in the UK happened, that was a whole thing in terms of, could a business survive from a regulatory change perspective? And some people, the answer to that was yes, and some people, the were to no. Think about, if you have regulation in your space, think about one of those regulations changing, and what would that mean for your business? So if you're in healthcare, really important. To be honest, every industry will have this. Health and safety, something to do with your health and safety in your business. If it's to do with, think about, COVID, for example, when people couldn't leave their houses, does that impact your business? Yes or no? If it does, then how does it? How would the business be able to adapt to be sustainable to that period of time? The other thing you have to think about, which a lot of businesses put to one side, is societal shifts. So societal shifts is a natural part of evolution and is something that we have to anticipate. We can't obviously dictate what those societal shifts are going to be, but if your business is very trend-led or is very focused on promoting one thing, this is where businesses can become very unsustainable. So if you're a product-based business that you sell a seasonal item, for example, societal shifts can be really kind of what on earth is the word, exposed to, might be a better word. Sorry, I can't find my words this afternoon. You would get exposed to this idea of, if societal shift happens, and that can be literally a trend, right? If a slinky's in trend, say a kid's toy, and you build this whole business around that, but then society shifts and goes, oh, we don't want that, we want a fidget toy instead. That's the kind of thing where a business can become unsustainable overnight. And so you really have to start thinking about, how will societal shifts make a difference? Another great example is from an impact from COVID was that, remember the summer, was it 2021 maybe? Maybe even 2022, where everybody started holiday in the UK. And so there was this huge boom of, hospitality, of the UK, you couldn't get a hotel. Like, there was loads of places in the UK you couldn't find a bloody hotel. It was like insane. You had to pay so much money. That led to a lot of people thinking, oh, well, where can we capitalize on this? And do we have any spare space? And should we add Airbnb to our back garden with a lodge or something in? And, people put a lot of money because they could see there was a demand. What the question then becomes is how sustainable is that at the point in which is the societal shift again, where everybody doesn't do that? And we saw that, like last year, for example, in 2023, a lot of the pricing of kind of stays and staycations in the UK dropped. I'm not saying it fell off a cliff, it didn't. There's always been a demand there and there always will be. And I still believe that they have got more of a demand now than they did before COVID. However, you could notice the difference last year of how much less demand there was in the UK for holiday because people could go elsewhere. So the societal shift happened. And for those businesses who were serving a purpose the year previous, now have to rearrange and relook at, okay, what is the sustainability of that? And again, it's not me saying that if the inevitable happens, then your business isn't sustainable. It's about understanding what is the contingency plan, or what is the idea behind that, or how do we diversify the risk? And that's a huge, huge one. You'll hear me talk about risk a lot in this episode. What we're kind of discussing here is scenario planning. Now, scenario planning is something I do with businesses. It's my one-on-one clients that tend to get this, and we look at it in depth, and we've been working together for a decent length of time. Unless someone kind of wants to do a consultant project purely on scenario plan, we will look at scenario planning, risk auditing, risk assessments, trend analysis, looking at, what is the risk value to the business? What is that worth? What is the potential of X, Y, and Z happening? And as a small business owner, you might think, oh God, what on earth is this? Why have I got to put this in? Like, why is this another thing to do? But I'd really urge you to take this seriously and to look at it and think about, what are you going to do if X, Y, and Z thing happens? Yes, you will never be able to mitigate everything. You will never be able to predict what's happening. You will never be able to completely, fully kind of, my goodness, what is the word? I'm so sorry if you're listening to this episode and getting infuriated with me for not being able to find my words today. You won't be able to kind of protect yourself from every possible thing that might happen. But the more contingency planning you do, the more understanding of the risk that is available to you in your business, the better chance you have of 1, mitigating it, 2, managing it when it comes up, 3, overcoming it, and 4, thriving off it. Because what some businesses are very clever at doing, and they can do very well, is that they can see an issue, the scenario happens, they do have a plan in place, they use that and make that happen, but then they can also benefit off that and sometimes even profit off that. And that's not me saying that people are trying to profit off bad, negative things. I'm just saying something can happen in their industry and they need to kind of swerve left and do something else. But if they're already prepared of how they're going to deal with that, they then can spend time on looking how to benefit from that rather than just survive from it. And that is something that is really important. And that is something I would argue makes a real sustainable business. If you can get a business to a point where it can actually sustain itself, but then at the point in which something goes wrong, have a quick sort of tweaking stage and shifting phase, but then move into how do we benefit from this? That is really important. And we saw in COVID some fantastic businesses who really managed to do that well. They provided a solution to people who needed it, and they also made money. And it was a win-win for people. What I'm talking about here is sometimes some businesses potentially that went online. We saw this big boom of online business. Some people went from, maybe they had a gym and they were able to therefore 10 times the amount of money they made because they switched to an online model. People were really in need of exercise. They wanted to move their bodies. They wanted to get really healthy. Someone came with a solution. People bought onto that. The word spread round and they had 10 times the amount of revenue that they did before. Other people are really happy because they got their sort of needs met with what they were struggling with. So the problem was, they wanted to move their body and they couldn't go to the gym or they couldn't go to the usual class. That is a perfect example where you can not only shift and pivot, but you can also actually benefit and see growth from a really difficult situation. When you have scenario planning in place and you have a risk audit and you understand what potentially could happen, that allows you to make strategic decisions faster and more appropriate. And this is where the impact that is felt by the business and the profit line on an end of year accounts is really impacted. Because strategic decision making is the bit that goes into freeze mode when something happens. And so if you are trying to build a sustainable business, I'd want to be looking at what is your strategic decision making process. Now, for some of you, you're a business of one, or you're the only director and you own 100% of the shares, and therefore that's great. It might just be that you are the only one to do the strategic decision making. But some of you have different share layouts where you're going to have different amounts of responsibility in who can make decisions and who can't. You need to fully understand, how do you make a strategic business decision? Is there a matrix for that? Do you need a document to outline that? Do you need people to understand if something happened, X, Y, and Z would take place in terms of who makes decisions and how they can make them? But if you are on your own, what you need to understand is, how will you make decisions at a time that you're stressed and feeling like you can't see the wood for the trees? Because a sustainable business will be able to make strategic based decisions even at the point in which things feel out of place and a bit all over the place and a bit kind of worrying. I hope this is kind of useful. I know for some people they're going to have switched off. If you're still here, thanks. I hope it's useful. It will be useful for you. I urge you to take this on board. I think sometimes when we talk about, is a business actually sustainable, people want a really fluffy conversation. They want me to say, like, do you make revenue from this and do you make revenue from that? But like, ultimately you've got to dig into this stuff. Like, this stuff's really, really important. And if you're listening to this and thinking, really need to do some work in the business around this, I'm more than happy to do this, because I know that sometimes doing this on your own, you're kind of like, I don't know, are we on the right track? Are we not? How's that going to work? So moving into the more true meaning of the word sustainability, we will touch on environmental sustainability, because, you know, the world we live in today in 2024, it's important that we factor in the environment. And as part of long-term sustainability, especially depending on specific industries you're in, this is a non-negotiable. For some of you, you're in industries where you have to prove that you are making strides forwards in terms of how your environmental sustainability is progressing, and it isn't an optional thing. And I think for most people, we can all appreciate that we all want to make sure that we're doing a positive thing for the environment rather than a negative. So obviously you want to look at, can you reduce your carbon footprint as a business? Can you minimize waste? How can you be more eco-friendly in your practices? All of that kind of stuff is really important for you to think about. Also looking at, you know, how does your supply chain impact your business? Are your processes environmentally sustainable, or are they actually the complete opposite? And I think, you know, there's tons and tons of examples of businesses who do this really well. You've obviously got the B Corp certification, which I know has a different, people have various different opinions on whether or not they think that's very good or not. But if you can do a quick Google search, you can find some really great examples of how businesses have become more sustainable in the sense of how I talk about sustainability, through upping their environmental sustainability efforts. And that's there's some lovely business cases to look at from there. But we must think about, how does the environment impact what we do? Because for some of you, you know, you're a travel business, or you create some kind of food product, and you're in an industry, maybe you're in the energy industry. Like, this industry is moving at such a pace that you have to make sure that your business is not going to be left behind. So if it's left behind, it's 100% not sustainable. So you've got to really think about that. Also, really, really important for you to think about your social responsibility as a business, and really look at, is your business diverse? Where is your diversity and inclusion policy? Are you actually living and breathing that? Do you have diversity in your business? Because we know from the statistics that the more diverse your business, the much more healthier it's going to be. I would argue that if you can build a more sustainable, a more diverse business and a more inclusive business, you will end up with a more sustainable business, because you will end up with a one that is filled with opportunities, voices, opinions. It's a really important piece of the pie. For some other businesses, if you have been going for a while, it's about, what is your labor policies, right? Like, what are you doing with your staff? Are they up to scratch? Because sometimes people are operating on policies that like are really out of date and are not up to scratch with your competitors. And when people have hiring issues, their hiring is massively unsustainable. And part of that is because what they're offering the people that they're trying to get to come work from them is so out of alignment with what everybody else is offering. So really making sure that, are you actually providing a great deal for people? Like, why should people want to come and work with you? Because if you're a business that relies on of human labor, of force, of workforce, then you've got to make sure that your hiring process is sustainable and that you can actually get decent talent, which I know for many of you is a real tough ongoing issue that you're feeling like you're constantly dealing with. Something I would think about is, as a business, what do you stand for? What are your values? What do you kind of say to the world? And are you making sure that that is what is happening inside of your business? And is that a true reflection and true picture? And are you proud of that? If someone says, these are your values and this is what your internal of the business looks like, will you feel like, yeah, do you know what? We've got that down. You're always going to be able to make improvements, but have you got a decent basis for that? Because that's something you need to look at in terms of, are you a sustainable business and can you stand the test of time? We have talked about technology and technology advancements, but I also think you need to be aware of innovation and disruption. So, how is technology going to innovate your business? I would spend some time listing out, like, what positive things can you think of that tech might be able to do eventually that would transform how your industry works or how your business runs. Also, though, think about, how can technology disrupt what it is that you're trying to do? Where would it just completely wipe out the need for your service? Where would it just be like, actually, yeah, that could be so much quicker, or you just couldn't compete on quality or time? They are all things that you really need to think about and understanding, like, what is the emerging technology in your space, and can you use it to give yourself a step ahead? Because many people are doing that. Many people are trying to figure out, well, if we have an AI piece of tech and we pair that with what we're already doing, what does that mean? Is it cheaper for the customer? Do you get more out of it for less time? Like, what is it that you actually get? Because that will help you to make sure that your business design stays up to date. I'm gonna move on now to talking about your ability to adapt and your resilience. So, as a business, you have to be able to deal with unforeseen changes, unforeseen circumstances, disruptions, crises, all sorts of things that you're probably never going to imagine, right? And not that anybody can think of. But what you need to have in place is a solid understanding of how you deal in a crisis. Because crises are the point where some businesses will fall under and some businesses will thrive. And it's not that you have to thrive, right? Sometimes survival will be enough. But you understanding that regardless of what the situation is, if you know how you manage things in a crisis, that will inherently help you. And what I mean by that is, for example, when COVID hit, the businesses who had crisis management planning in place, who understood what happens when there's a crisis management, like who speaks on behalf of the business, what is the business going to say, what isn't it going to say, all that kind of stuff. If that was already in place, it helped people because they didn't have to then establish that. Most businesses had to establish it at the point in which it happened. Now, I'm not saying that there's always kind of, it's not a like here or now thing of, is it going to happen, is it not? I just want you to really think about, can you get your ducks in a row, essentially, so that should something happen, you know where all of the lists of contacts are going to be. Have you got a document that has everything on it that you need to fully make sure that everybody in your business is contacted, thought of, like really simple, basic things that you're thinking in your head right now, well, why am I going to spend time doing that? Because at the time I need it, I'll find it. What I'm saying to you is, at the point in which there is a crisis, you need to be able to access this stuff so easily. Like, what happens if for some reason you have no access to internet? Can you still contact people? Can you still access the stuff you need to access? And I get that in this day and age, that as a concept seems very strange and very, unlikely. But given how bizarre this world is at the minute, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that. To say, like, well, what would you do if that happened? You have to think about these sort of bits and pieces. The other thing I would invite you to have a think about, is that your business, this episode is not there to make you think, my business is rubbish, it's not sustainable, it's never going to work, and there's tons of work to do. That's not the point of this episode. The point of this episode is to kind of invite you to go on a journey of thinking about, okay, how can I make sure that I am continuing to build a business that is not just serving me right now and that can exist in years and years to come? And so, from a more practical level, I want you to think about, having a long-term plan. People think having a long-term plan is just like so that you kind of know where you're going. The point of having a long-term plan, part of that is that you will protect yourself and be more sustainable if you have a long-term plan and a long-term vision. Categorically. You will also find growth easier 9 times out of 10 because it will make things become easy for you to make decisions on, and it's more about action than it is you constantly having to make difficult, challenging, and multifaceted decisions. When you're sat here thinking, right, okay, well, is the business sustainable or not? Coming back to that question, think about where your business generates money. Do you have just one main contract? If your revenue comes from one main contract, immediately the business is not sustainable. Because if that contract goes, then you've kind of been in a nightmare. So, like, leads and how you get leads into your business is something I always look at when we're looking at sustainability. Do you have more than one way of leads getting to you? Ideally, you need as many different options as possible, because at any one time, you need to be able to put more fuel onto that section, i.e. the fire, and get more leads through that way. So you having 5, 6, 7 different ways of leads to come to you is immensely useful. And that adds a lot of benefit and a lot of value to your business. Other things are, where can people buy things from and what are they buying? Is there only one option to buy something from you? Potentially, that is not necessarily the best option. Now, I know that contradicts sometimes what I say about pick one thing and scale the hell out of it. What I would recommend you do, though, is for some of you, you will be at a point where you scale a really nice product to a really nice level, and then you start layering in and diversifying further. But having different options in your business, and what I would really recommend is that they're different delivery options. That's what adds a sustainable element to your business, is the delivery method. So it's not necessarily about the amount of money, which people often think it is. It's about having, people will say to me, it's about having, something for £7 and something for 70 grand. That's not what makes it sustainable. What makes it sustainable is how is it delivered? As in, is it using your one-on-one time all the time? Or is it using, is it a passive product? Is it reoccurring revenue? Is it something that people can buy once and they'll never need to buy again? Or is it something that we will continue to purchase? Having different elements in your business will build a more sustainable product offering. Trying to think what else would make sense. Okay, your marketing. A lot of people's marketing is very unsustainable. So what of your marketing are you owning? Your email list, great. What else do you own? Where are you actually putting solid assets out into the world of your business, and what is just a marketing activity? There's a real difference between a marketing asset and a marketing activity piece. And understanding the difference between the two is really important. What is your SEO stuff like? Is that actually working for you? Because that's a real interesting one in terms of building sustainability that's going to last years and years. That's something that's really going to pay off big time for you. So thinking through, go through the different areas and departments of your business and think about, is this a here and now result or is this a long-term result? Now, obviously, you still need the here and now results because that's natural. You need to keep the business going and you want to have a vibrant, exciting business. But having a balance of the two is important. What is your reputation? Yes, your reputation can be broken within, minutes, sadly, in the day and age that we live in. But also building that takes years and years. And I would say that reputations in a business can build sustainability in itself, which is something that not many people talk about. But if you think about institutions, that's what often buys them their success a lot of the time. It's not necessarily they've got the best product, it's the sustainable kind of belief and reliability and trust that they build. Your brand is another important one. think about, is your brand trend led? Is it very much a here and now, boom or bust? Or is it sort of, trying to say segmented's not the right word, grounded in a core brand message that will stand the test of time? That's another really important one. So when we're going back to thinking about, is your business actually sustainable? Will it work in 15 years' time? Yes, think about the obvious stuff like the money, like will you be able to work in 15 years' time, or do you need to be retired by then? So do you need to make sure you've got passive income? Are you going to sell it? All of that stuff. But I also want you to dig deeper and think about the more structural stuff, and think about the stuff that maybe you haven't actually thought about in terms of how do you build longevity into a business. Nurturing of a community is really important. Yes, not every community member is going to stay with you for 15 years. Yes, the people that buy from you today might not buy from you in 15 years. But that constant creation of community and tweaking and nurturing and connection will inevitably mean that as people leave, people are coming in, and that beautiful kind of way that the funnel works will continue to grow, rather than you being very sporadic in your community growth, which then means that your result at the end can often be very sort of years and years of wasted activity. I'm trying not to say this because I say this at every episode. We could keep going on and on about it, but I hope this has been. I think this is a different episode. We don't hear a lot of people talking on this stuff. If you have other elements and questions about this topic, please get in touch, because I'm more than happy to do like a Q&A off the back of this episode. If there are things that you didn't quite get, or you're thinking, May, you didn't cover this, or what's your thoughts on X, Y, and Z? It's a really important topic, and it's one that's worth you thinking about. Is your business sustainable? Where's your risk in your business? What is the risk factors? The other thing we haven't spoken about necessarily that much is people. You need to think about, where is the risk factor across people in your team, which again is a tricky one, and you can do this whether they're freelance or whether they're employed, but thinking about different people in the business and, have you got SOPs? Is everything documented? Can the business run without a specific person being in it? What happens if so-and-so does leave? What would that mean for the business? Where would everybody sit? Who would jump in? That kind of stuff really matters, and you need to take time to think about. Just because it's all running smoothly right now, it might not at some point. Someone might move on, someone might leave, someone might do this, someone might do that. You've got to think about, how would the business look as it moves and as it changes. I will leave it there. I hope you are very much energized by this episode, rather than feeling like, oh, this is so much. I want you to feel like, no, we've got this. My business is sustainable. It can be sustainable. I'm going to go off and do a few little things, but this is good. Because that's what it should be. You don't have to have all of this, sorted out. For those of you who are one-man bands, who you're thinking, this sounds like a lot of work, like, that's okay. Don't panic. It doesn't all have to happen overnight. I'm just really trying to set you up to be the 1% of people who have got a specific area where they're like, do you know what, actually, we can boss this, because therefore we're going to survive whatever is thrown at us. It's a really important one. Take care. I will speak to you next week. Feel free to tag me in any of your social media posts about the about this episode, or about your thoughts. Or if you fancy, leave me a review, which would be very nice. Do subscribe as well on whatever platform you're listening to this, so that you get notified when our next episode comes out, which they drop every Wednesday morning. Speak to you soon. Bye.